This is why I don't want to trade him. This is why I think he could be a valuable player next season. This is why the Boston Celtics are not on a 3-game losing streak. You know who I'm talking about. It's the Inferno, and he just dropped 39 in South Beach. What's up, everyone, and welcome into your Celtic Source, home of your 25 and 15, currently tied for second place Boston Celtics. The Knicks are playing later tonight against the Golden State Warriors. Actually, they're probably just about starting as I am recording this, and we'll see what happens with that game. But this game shows you just how valuable a guy like Anfernee Simons can be if he's in the right system, right? In Portland, it was never going to work. They just didn't have the defensive guys around him, the coaching, the culture. But in Boston, with the coaching staff that Joe Mazzulla has around him, with the culture and the dedication towards winning, you can take a brilliant offensive player and put him in a defensive scheme where he can not just survive, but thrive. And that allows him to do what he does on the offensive court or offensive end all night long, because he knows, or Joe Mazzulla has confidence, that it's not going to be a struggle on the other end. And by no means was this a good defensive game from the Celtics for the majority of the game, right? The Celtics very much struggled to defend Bam Adebayo and Norman Powell, especially in that second half, right? And it was once again a horrific start for the Celtics. The Celtics, over the, not a thing last year, not a thing in their championship year in 2024, but this season, they have not gotten off to fast starts. And I'm not sure what's going into that. They come out very flat-footed, and in this game, it looked like it was going to be a disaster, a 30-point blowout, right after the first quarter. And then we know what happened. And we're going to get into what happened. But I will just say that the Celtics coming into this game were 4-5 on 2+ days of rest. They played better on back-to-backs or, every other day scenarios. I'm not sure why, but the Celtics really struggled to get the energy, the momentum after long days of rest. Right? Bam Adebayo got whatever he wanted in that first quarter and really pretty much throughout the game. The Celtics were down 27-9 after there was 8 minutes into the first quarter. And obviously Anfernee Simons gets them back in the game in the first quarter with some big threes off the bench, a quick timeout from Joe Mazzulla, and he subs in Shireman, Ugo Gonzalez, Simons, and they, stop the bleeding. But that first half, despite what Anfernee Simons did, his, performance was the second half. That's where we're going to talk about Anfernee Simons. This first half really wasn't a great first half from Anfernee Simons' standards, right? It was just his, normal, I don't quite remember what he had at the halfway point, but he had, probably 15 points, something like that. Average scoring for him coming off the bench. He did have 27 points twice now, I think it is, in a single first half coming into this game. But this was by far his best performance. But, before we get to Anfernee Simons, Bam Adebayo, he had 22 points, 3 of 7 from 3, 4 rebounds, 5 assists. The Celtics, left a lot of guys open for most of the 3 quarters before the Celtics came back, right? And, I don't know if it was whether, a decision from Joe Mazzulla, just a strategy in that game to leave guys, maybe less reliant 3-point shooters open, but That's not what I saw. I didn't see, a scheme-based thing on how the Celtics were getting destroyed. I saw them getting destroyed on, just off the dribble. Which then allowed guys to get open in the corner for threes, right? Specifically Neemias Queta. Neemias Queta was truly terrible in this game, and he ends up a -1. He picks up, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 5 fouls in the game. Maybe it was at 4. But, he was just getting attacked off the dribble from Bam Adebayo. And Bam Adebayo is one of those craftier centers that can move his feet and play more like a forward rather than a center. And they did, go with Kel'el Ware, who, by the way, can shoot threes and did knock down a couple threes in this game. If I am not mistaken, Kel'el Ware did go 1 of 14 or 1 of 4 from 3. Right, he didn't play much. Bam Adebayo played most of the heavy minutes in this game. But that being said, right, Bam Adebayo being guarded by Queta was just a mismatch right from the beginning. Bam Adebayo driving to the basket allowed just sort of kickouts to the corner, swing, and you get a wide open 3 at the top of the key for a guy like Norman Powell, who is a knockdown shooter, or a guy like Tyler Hero. Andrew Wiggins hit a couple threes in this game as well, right? The Miami Heat weren't doing anything special. They weren't running any great offense. It was just the Celtics could not play defense in this game. They just completely, lack the ability to stay in front of guys, to contest shots. Bam Adebayo got some, I'm not going to say they were lucky bounces because, he was able to get right to the basket for, float game, mid-range shots that were just uncontested. And he did get the nice bounces, right? That's where the sort of luck comes in. But they're very similar to the bounces that Jaylen Brown has been getting, throughout the season, right? It just came from Bam Adebayo elevating to a spot where nobody else was around him, right? And it wasn't anything special, as I said, that the Miami Heat were doing. It was just complete lack of hustle, energy, effort, whatever it was, skill. I don't even, it was a game that just we haven't seen this season from the Celtics. The defense that they were playing in the first half, and mainly the first half and a tiny bit of the third quarter as well. But as we said, Anfernee Simons, he slowly gets them back in the game in the first half. Right, it goes from down, being outscored by triple 27-9. With like 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter to being a 11, 12, 13-point game at half, right? We talked about Neemias Queta getting just attacked, but the success for the Heat continued into the third quarter, and it wasn't Bam in the third quarter. It became Norman Powell attacking some of the guards off the dribble. Not guards, the forwards. Hugo Gonzalez picked up some, sloppy fouls guarding him. Bill Shireman got, a limited run, but when he was out there, he didn't look great guarding him as well. Jordan Walsh struggled mightily defending him in this game, right? And he finishes the game, Norman Powell does, with, if I'm not mistaken, if I can find, yes, he finishes the game with 26 points on 10 of 15 shooting, 1 of 3, right? So he was just extremely efficient in this game. Could not miss from the mid-range area. He has, if I'm not mistaken, just 1 turnover. Nope, 0 turnover. So he wasn't turning the ball over. He was getting great shots for his teammates, for himself. And when you're shooting, what was that, like 10 of 15? So is that when a 66%? There is very little chance that a team is going to be, sort of outscoring you, right? You just have to keep pace with what they were doing. And they were able to do that thankfully, the Celtics in the third quarter, right? Which is why the lead didn't explode on the Celtics. They kept it, within reachable distance for the fourth quarter. And in the fourth quarter, the Celtics just needed a spark. They lacked the energy, the hustle all night long to get the defensive stops on guys like Norman Powell, Bam Adebayo, to allow their offense to counteract that. And, they didn't have great offense throughout most of the night, but it wasn't, truly terrible offense. They just could not get a stop defensively. And they got the spark they needed. And the spark didn't come on the defensive end like you would imagine. It came from Anfernee Simons on the offensive end, which then motivated, the rest of the players to, perform on the defensive end. And in this game, Anfernee Simons scores 39 points on, 13 of 28 shooting, 7 of 16 from 3, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. But we all know the impact that he made goes well beyond the shooting numbers. It was his ability to just come into the game. Obviously all of this is coming off the bench, but come into this game and do things like Peyton Pritchard was doing last season. Pull up off the sidestep on a dribble, come around a screen and, either shoot the wide open three on the pull up or, make one more pass to Sam Hauser for an open shot, who was able to sort of benefit from the attention Anfernee Simons was getting, right? But quite frankly, it didn't matter whether he was getting doubled or whether, they were letting him go one-on-one. Anfernee Simons was just, he just went nuclear. He was unconscious from 3 in this game. This was one of the games that shows you, as I said at the top of the show, why I don't think you want to trade a guy like this, right? And after a game like this, maybe his value does go up, but he could be so useful as your 6th man. He is already in the 6th man of the year contention this season for the actual award, but I'm just saying in future years, even down the stretch in this game, having him as your 6th man of the year, and his ability to not be a complete disaster on the defensive end anymore. We saw guys like Trae Young being traded for that reason. Luka Doncic has a history of not being great on the defensive end. These stars, LaMelo Ball, could care less about playing defense, right? Anfernee Simons was one of those guys, but just being in Boston changes that, right? Seeing how, the community, the fan support, the culture, can make you. I'm not saying he ever has the skills or the size or the ability to be an all-world defender, but he can be playable. And if he's playable, he can do what he is an all-world player at, and that is score the basketball. Put the ball in the basket and just take a game that was going nowhere for the Celtics. In fact, it was going downhill quickly, and just completely flip the game on his head. And I think there are very few players in the NBA that are like that, especially off the bench. Peyton Pritchard was that for the Celtics last season, and now you have another one in Anfernee Simons. You have 2 guys that can change the momentum of games like that. Peyton Pritchard, right, doesn't have that same sort of energy around it because he's starting every single game now, and, so he's sort of part of the, I'm not saying the problem in this game, but he is part of the, the sometimes sort of lackluster or sort of, half asleep performances that you get, right? The guy of, the sort of the role of a guy like Sam Hauser over the last couple seasons and Anfernee Simons this season is just come on and spark a run for the Celtics. And in this game, the run that you sparked was a run when you were down 15 points, and he single-handedly brought the Celtics back into this game. And I'm going to finish the show talking about Jaylen Brown because I think Jaylen Brown had, a game where teams have sort of figured out how to guard Jaylen Brown, and he's been very quiet as of recently, but he gets his numbers. This was not a great game for him turnover-wise, and we'll talk about him in just a second, but, this is a game where Jaylen Brown, after Anfernee Simons did all the work to get them back in the game in the fourth quarter, in crunch time, Jaylen Brown is able to go to work and score some crucial buckets to win you the game, right? And sometimes that's just what you need, right? Sometimes your superstars are, asleep for all of the game, and then in the last 2 minutes, they come alive and win you a game or lose you a game, vice versa, right? On another team could do the same thing. But Anfernee Simons, as I said, he does all the work, and that allows Jaylen Brown to basically, sit for a lot of the fourth quarter, but come in well rested after struggling in the third quarter and not playing much. He comes in with 7 minutes to go in the fourth quarter and is able to close it out, right? But you needed someone like Anfernee Simons to make that happen. And I'm just going to keep saying this, right? The trade deadline is coming up in less than 3 weeks, I think it is at this point, maybe just about 3 weeks, on February 5th. I expect the Celtics to not do much. Jason Tatum's return is looming on the horizon. You have, maybe a possibility of going out and getting a, backup center, especially the way that Kata performed in this game was not great. But that being said, there's not much on the, trade market. There's been rumors for Jaren Jackson Jr. I don't recommend doing that. I just think that his rebounding or lack of rebounding ability is something that the Celtics already don't have with their centers here, and so you're not looking to bring that in to increase that problem. I know Valanciunas has been an option. Before. I know what's the center on the Clippers that could be an option maybe. There are, some backup centers that could be good options for the Celtics. But personally, I think this is a year where you just, you don't have great center depth, but you just stay pat at the trade deadline. I don't think they're going to move off of Anfernee Simons, especially after a game like this. And as I said, I don't think they should. They should keep him for many years. Obviously not on a $27 million contract, right? But if you can lower that down to, 14 maybe, he can just be such a great man, spark player, role player, off the bench, as I've said countless times on this episode, right? But as I'm saying, on this trade deadline issue, right, I think they stay pat. They wait for Jason Tatum's return, and they see what type of run they can make in the playoffs this season. Because I think, right now, I think Jason Tatum just passed 8 months, and it's looking more and more likely that his return is going to be a reality this season. And, obviously, when that news comes out, we will go live and react to the news in whichever way. We'll have a little, I'm not going to say celebration, but just, relax and, obviously it's going to take a couple weeks and games and months for Jason Tatum to get back in the flow. But, his ability to return so quickly, and you have a team that, is already in a playoff spot. It's not a team that's tanking like the Indiana Pacers, right? Everyone came into this season wondering, how, when I say how good, were the Celtics even going to win, half of their games, right? Were they going to have a losing record? Would they be, way down in the lottery? Nobody expected this team to be like this. And yes, they've had a couple of, losses over the last week or so. But that being said, for the most part, they're 10 games above 500. And Jaylen Brown is playing like an MVP. You're getting contributions from Anfernee Simons when your star players don't show up. And overall, this team is set to make a playoff run this season. But I'm going to wrap it up by talking about Jaylen Brown in this game. And yes, he has 27 points on 9 of 24 shooting, 2 of 7 from 3. Does have 7 rebounds, doesn't have many assists, 0, I believe. He has the 5 turnovers, right? This was a game where he got a couple turnovers, a couple bad passes from him, a couple games or a couple sort of offensive foul turnovers with his little push off that he sometimes does. But that was all mostly in the first 3 quarters, because in the fourth quarter it wasn't Jaylen Brown losing you a game like we've seen against maybe the Nuggets and the Spurs. It was Jaylen Brown coming up clutch, knocking down 2 big mid-range fadeaway shots over Bam Adebayo, over, I believe, one over Norman Powell as well, and basically taking the momentum from Anfernee Simons and basically finishing out the game for you, right? Doing what a star player does, right? And this is not a game where we're going to talk about Jaylen Brown, right? He still has 27 points. It wasn't a game where, it was really, I'm not going to say it was a quiet 27 points, right? 27 points is still a great number, but the attention of this game wasn't to talk about Jaylen Brown. It was to talk about Anfernee Simons. And I think, it's important to remember that Jaylen Brown is still, your leading player. He's still the one that makes the engine go. And, Jaylen Brown did sit for multiple, stretches of time in this game. He didn't look great in the first half, first 3 quarters really. But it's important to know that you have 2 superstars in this game, or 2 superstars on this team, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum when he's come back, and that Jaylen Brown, when it's all said and done, makes the final winning plays. But I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Once again, the Celtics win 119-114 over the Miami Heat in South Beach to improve to 25-15. They play the Atlanta Hawks, the Trae Youngless Atlanta Hawks, on Saturday. We are going to go live for the actual game and do a watch party, and then we'll have a live post-game show afterwards, instant reaction like this one, but live, so tune in to the YouTube chat. And then Sunday, it's another playoff game for Drake May going up against the Houston Texans. But before that, we are going to have another podcast episode 51, I do believe, and we're going to talk about this game. We'll talk more about Anfernee Simons. We'll talk more about the Pacers loss and whatever happens in the game against Atlanta. We'll also do a little trade deadline preview maybe, as well as All-Stars, because that's all coming up down the road. And obviously, we will do a Texans-Patriots Chargers preview. So, a jam-packed weekend coming up on Saturday with the stream and the both streams, one for the game and one for the post-game show afterwards. And then Sunday we have the podcast coming out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts. And then Sunday night I won't be doing any special coverage or anything for that, but we'll all be glued to our couch watching Drake May counter this Houston Texans all-worldly defense. But until next time, go Seas.